Hello and welcome to the Spe Salvi Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin, joined by my good friend, Bobby Mixa. Bobby, how are you?
I'm great, Andrew. It's great to be with you, man. I'm so happy that we're finally having our first podcast together.
Yeah, we're having our first podcast together, and it is related to this venture that we're setting out on, this adventure, we might call it, pilgrimage even. We are, I don't know, to throw in another metaphor, we're setting sail on our maiden voyage as part of this new undertaking that we're getting into called the Spe Salvi Institute. It's something that we have talked about for a long time and thought about. We really are excited about it, and so we are underway here. So I wonder if you could just kind of kick it off by talking about what this thing is that we are getting going with now.
Yeah. Well, the Spe Salvi Institute is kind of an idea that came out of our conversations, Andrew. Just to kind of put this a little bit in context, Andrew and I used to work together for the Word on Fire Institute. And based on our conversations over lunch, or even, sometimes even when we're trying to throw around ideas for the different articles that we were working on, we constantly came back to the theme of hope. We were focusing a lot on Pope Benedict. And around the time that Pope Benedict died, this idea was really kind of, emerging in me. How can we bring together a lot of the themes that Pope Benedict was focused on, but also John Paul II, but also kind of like in the context of what's the situation today. So for the past, 10 years, I've had this feeling that this like cloud of despair in some ways is hovering over, I don't know if all societies, but at least the West. And it seems like, including Europe and America within that as well. And it just seems to me that when you look at the writings of Pope Benedict, the theme of hope just constantly comes up. And going back to like one of the, say, most devastating events in the history of the West, World War I started reading a lot of Charles Péguy, and he has this great long poem called The Portal to the Mystery of Hope. And it just seems to me that Pope Benedict, he was going back to Péguy very often, but Péguy says that hope is like this little child that we've forgotten about, and she's in the middle between, her two big sisters, faith and charity. But in some ways, they're both holding, as Péguy says, they're both holding her up, little hope. But in some ways, in holding her up, she's actually the ones supporting them, indeed, and guiding them. So it just seems to me that, okay, we need to pay a little bit more attention to Christian hope. And I was writing an article on, I think, some of the secular utopias that were going on in the world in the 20th century, and a lot of the religious fervor that kind of almost in a way migrated over to those revolutionary movements that were in some ways utopian, but in a way took the place of something like Christian hope and this pilgrimage towards the heavenly Jerusalem. But they were, in some ways, this hope was in vain because it was purely the work of human hands. But yet still, those movements inspired so many of the youth to give their lives to fighting for the cause. But we've seen those things Andrew, we were talking a lot about the Cold War and then the 90s and everything else coming up with this, the Cold War has ended. Now this new world is emerging, but yet it's, for many people, it's kind of been a little disappointing because it's lacking that maybe transcendent dimension. So, I could go on, but all of that stuff has come together for me, at least, thinking about, well, what can we contribute to help people in a way emerge from this cloud of despair?
Yeah. There's a great line in, I was just looking over John Paul II's Ecclesia in Europa, which is a document that you turned me on to, and I think is a really important document from the end of John Paul II's pontificate, very much connected to stuff that Pope Benedict is also going to be saying and writing during his pontificate, and that defined a lot of his intellectual output. But there's a line that goes something like, with the loss of Christian memory comes a fear of the future. And, I think that you and I think, talked about that line before. It's one that just really sticks with me. And it's one that I think is partly animating our project. And maybe that's a good segue into talking about the European component of it, which you've already touched on a little bit. But yeah, so we wanted to create a website, a podcast, opportunities for like conferences, seminars, study tours that are rooted first off in this theological virtue of hope, and using Pope Benedict's document Spe Salvi, just such an important encyclical for our times, as one of the guiding lights. The additional interesting thing for the two of us is now, Bobby, you are living in Poland, married to a European woman. I am still here in the United States of America, in Texas, missing you very much, but excited for you to have your adventure across the pond. But both of us have this lifelong fascination with Europe, with European culture. I think it's fair to say, both of us really identify in European culture, our own culture, and we are nourished in our own faith by the faith of our European ancestors. And so, when we think of Europe, we think of the great cathedrals, we think of the pilgrimage routes, we think of, all the great traditions, all the different ways in which Europe and the faith are completely inextricably linked. And, while there are a lot of people nowadays in the world who really think, well, maybe kind of the dominance of the faith in Europe and the dominance of the faith even in the whole Northern Hemisphere is kind of at an end. And maybe now it's kind of time to look to the global South and, to these places where the faith is really exploding. We are really excited that the faith is exploding in those places, but we are also not ready at all to give up on Europe. And in fact, for my part, I would say, the faith really rises and falls with Europe. And, that line from John Paul II with kind of the loss of Christian memory. So, I think part of what we want to do, right, Bobby, is take what Europe and its past and present, in a sense, like its sort of cultural embeddedness of Christianity, and sort of preach that to our own countrymen in America, but then also to kind of be an encouragement to Europe to continue to kind of discover and rediscover its own rich patrimony. So I don't know, throw that back to you and see what you think about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of the call to, in some ways, to evoke the memory, of Europeans. I right now I'm teaching at an international school, and most of my students come from various European countries, and actually half of them probably are from Krakow. But many of them, when they walk around the city of Krakow and they take in the architecture and just the history of it, many of them do not really have that basis to make sense of the city that they're walking through. I mean, they don't know much about the Christian tradition. They don't know much about, I mean, I'm not assuming that they're going to know like architecture and urban planning, but they can't really read the city well. And so part of my like job as a history teacher is to help them in some way, like read it well and also to remember. And what's fascinating, okay, this is a secular school, but what's fascinating for me is that this is like, I see it in their eyes. There's like this glimmer of hope and like meaning that they've never really have encountered before. And a lot of them are actually pushing back, which is good. But I've seen that they're now like in a way connecting everything. So last week we walked around the city. We're doing something on the Renaissance, and we walked around the city and we saw, well, okay, why is the building, why are the proportions this way? Why is actually the church like located right here? Why are there so many steps up to the church? And then why are the columns different? And why, okay, so what's the kind of grammar of this city? And I saw this kind of like there was like almost like this, they perceived this beauty that they wanted to come back to. And so anyways, I see part of the Spe Salvi is to help like Europeans come to better read their own tradition, their own cities and all that, but also like for Americans like us who like travel to Europe, and for me at least, like really feel like sometimes in a way we've encountered something like a Catholic culture, not to like go overboard, but we see things that perhaps the Europeans themselves don't see. So just one example. I mean, I really kind of had this experience when I was in Spain for 6 months, and I remember I spent Holy Week in Portugal, and it was the first time I ever really felt like the faith flooded the entire city. I mean, like it was a very like tangible thing, and everything was kind of partaking in the rhythms of the Holy Week. And I always kind of had this idea of the faith as being something that is like on the outskirts of the suburbs. It doesn't come into the center, even if there is a center to this of the suburb, but it doesn't flood the streets. Whereas I saw it there in Portugal, and I started to want to learn more. Like, well, what is this all about? Why do they build this way? And so in many ways, still, I mean, it's like it's in Europe, it's still part of the culture. I mean, I think of this joke that Alistair McIntyre one time said, and I hope this is appropriate for, appropriate application of it. But one time he was talking about the conflict in Northern Ireland, and he said you often get stopped in the streets, and they pose like a gang of guys would pose the question to you: Catholic or Protestant? And the smart thing to do is to say atheist, but then they reply Catholic atheist or Protestant atheist.
Right.
And so the joke is, right, that there is a difference. And so like when you come to continental Europe, at least, perhaps even Ireland, you still, in some ways, more or less, even if it's a secular thing, you still experience the Catholic thing more or less.
Yeah, that several thoughts to that. I mean, I definitely grew up in a context. It wasn't articulated as such, but the idea that cultural Christianity was kind of an awful thing. That is to say, like just being, a religion that's just cultural, right? Yeah. Now, of course, we don't want a religion that's just cultural. However, a religion that is cultural is very powerful, and to the extent that even now, as we're considering, to jump off the point you were just making, as we're considering kind of the faith of Europe versus the faith of the United States, for example. I mean, American Christians, including American Catholic leaders, are often happy to point out the fact that church attendance is much higher in the United States than it is in Europe. Well, I mean, they're happy to say, at least Americans are still coming to church in some places, and oh, how sad it is that they aren't going anymore in Europe. And yet there's a large cultural component, and not just, I mean, it exists in certain homes and certain families, but as you're saying, like in the city, in the country, like, that kind of like interwoven fabric that you still have in Europe, even in a place like France that has a 10% Muslim population now. Pierre Manon, one of my favorites, talks about the marks of Christianity that even secular France, until probably 40 years ago or so, was still a Catholic secular France, right, or a Christian secular France. And in the United States, we've always struggled with this, with like sort of how to be Christian in this this overtly pluralistic society. Even though in some respects there were a lot of cultural trappings of Christianity all around in the United States too, until 30 or 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But what we do find is this big problem now, where Christianity is increasingly personalized and is acceptable as a kind of personal thing, and the cultural aspect of it, or the society-wide, the idea of a Christian society, is something that seems kind of quaint or passé, if not if not offensive to even to Christians, right? And I think something that we want to say to our countrymen in America is, it is actually the goal. It is actually the goal to live in a society that has all the trappings in place to kind of foster authentic faith. And Europe is a place which is mysterious to Americans because, I mean, the masses are not heaving with people, and yet the Christianity is embedded there in a way that we just don't have in our country. I use the example, Bobby, you know this, in the suburb in Texas where I live, they're building this big, beautiful new Catholic church, and it's going to be beautiful. They bulldozed the old brutalist 20th century thing that was there before. Thanks be to God, it's fantastic. And so I'm excited about it. It's actually within walking distance of my house, which is cool. But when I think about it, I'm still troubled by the fact that it's on one corner of a huge intersection, and on the other corners of the other intersections there's a McDonald's with a mosque behind it on one corner, there's the Chamber of Commerce with a dentist's office on the other corner, and there's kind of a shopping center with a car wash and a just all kinds of other shops on the other corner. And I just think like this big beautiful new church is not enough to dominate the landscape, even though it is going to be really big and beautiful. So now, again, we take our wins where we can get them, but it's just to point out that we're really in a different place in the United States, even than so-called secular Europe is, with so many things kind of that come together in this like cultural faith kind of way.
Yeah, it's like it's hard where you want to support, say, the options and kind of and that's literally within the landscape where it's almost like I don't know, some kind of buffet where you can just load up whatever your need is at the moment, but there's still like the focal point, or like the kind of the center that you still feel in these cities where you have a sense of like ultimate importance that isn't just this kind of like nothingness that is at the center. I mean, you look at Chicago and like where are people meeting right now? Like if you had to meet somebody at any time of the day somewhere in the city, you didn't know where you're supposed to meet, you'd possibly go meet by the Bean. The Bean, yeah. Or what's the official name? But anyways, there's just this kind of it's this distorted or bean-like mirror that you get a distorted image of yourself back. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of cool at first, but it's really, I mean, I really don't know what the meaning is there. And then in New York, you can go to like, what's the train station? Is it Central Station or
Grand Central Terminal? Yeah.
Grand Central Terminal with the clock at the center. In some ways, perhaps that is saying something about the clock and the world in which that thing was made, with everything's running on time and perhaps is ordered. But in Krakow, where do you go meet? You go meet by the Adam Mickiewicz statue, by right there in the Rinnick, you're facing St. Mary's Basilica, and you probably at the strike of the next hour, you'll hear the song coming from the trumpet. And anyways, there's just it's just a different experience. So like, in phenomenology, they talk about like the life world a lot and like lived experience. So I think what we're trying to get at is try to look at the life world of Europe and making the claim that it still has these marks, as you say.
Yeah.
And also for like Americans like us to look at our own life world and then to see, well, how life worlds change and all that stuff. So we can, I think that the Spe Salvi, when you look at all of these practices in Europe, you can still get a sense of the life world is somewhat centered around something like pilgrimage. And when Europe goes wrong, I mean, you find secular forms of that. like even other nations, like nationalism, where the nation is in some ways on its own pilgrimage towards something like just for itself.
Hmm.
And America has that. America does have that, like city
Hmm.
on the hill and all that other stuff. But there's that Christian dimension that's still there, and in a way has become secularized too. But the practices of hope is something that I really would like to focus in on.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned pilgrimage. I mean, we're definitely going to look at leading pilgrimages,
Yeah.
encouraging people to take pilgrimages. I mean, make our whole work, in a sense, like kind of a journey, kind of a pilgrimage, right?
Well, didn't Santiago Compostela, like the way they had, I think more pilgrims on that than ever before in the last year.
Yeah,
And
and the big one in France this summer as well
yeah,
was sort of was record numbers. Yeah.
yeah. But like I like around my house here, we have I didn't know that the way the what is it called? The Compostelo, what's
The Camino.
the Camino, yeah. The Camino is all the way, it comes all the way through Poland too. So you could
Oh
literally
wow.
walk along this path, which pointed out with the shell, and you can make your way all the way to the Camino. So it's interesting, like perhaps even Europe, in a way, is like the various paths of the Camino all linked
Yeah.
together. So
Yeah, and for people who are listening to this conversation and wondering like what form will these ideas take? I mean, you and I are going to continue to write articles like we've done for
yeah,
several years, for a long time, under this banner of the Spe Salvi Institute. We're thinking about some of these theological and cultural ideas. An additional thing is, of course, kind of the artistic media side. I write a lot about film. You and I talk a lot about film. You've also written about films. And a point that I think is important to make as we're talking about this kind of hope and kind of the Christian marks of Europe and Christian society is to note that our interest in Europe is not just that, oh, they happen to still have these great old buildings and institutions, but that actually even the modern kind of intellectual output among people who don't even identify as Christians tends to be more focused on these big questions of existence, of the future, of the meaning of reality, all of these kinds of big questions, than what is typical of American entertainment offerings, to just put it bluntly. The whole world, we're told, loves the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and American films make big bucks worldwide and all of that sort of thing. And there are real intellectuals who are working in American cinema. Obviously, Terrence Malick is one of them. I think Wes Anderson is one of them. There are a lot. And likewise, writers and playwrights and novelists and all of that sort of thing. But for my money, I just one of my goals, and I think yours too, Bobby, is to try to put in front of our countrymen certain films, books, artistic offerings from European artists, and again, going back in the opposite direction, find ways to be in dialogue directly with that community, with those people, to encourage Europe in those endeavors too. So
and
it's
you're
not
reading
only
Tarkovsky, right? Tarkovsky's diaries right now.
Tarkovsky's diaries. Yeah, boy, fascinating stuff in there. Tarkovsky is such a great example. But, Ingmar Bergman was one of Tarkovsky's idols. And Bergman was the son of a Lutheran pastor in Sweden. He himself was, I guess, an atheist. But I mean, all of his movies are about like the most important questions. I mean, some of his movies are really difficult to watch. But my goodness, I mean, you're never going to walk away from one of those movies thinking like, oh, that was okay, or oh, that was a nice way to pass the time, or something, right?
You're not going to
And
be
that
like,
tends,
eating your popcorn as you watch the
I
movie.
mean, there are a couple of them that are fun, like Wild Strawberries, and like, that have kind of more of an entertainment component to them. But
Yeah.
yeah, No, and I mean in modern cinema, I mean people like Lars von Trier to me are so important. The the Dardenne brothers in Belgium, and so many other. I mean Paolo Sorrentino, you and I talk about him a lot,
Yeah.
who created this incredible two series show for HBO about the Pope. And he himself says that he's not really religious and all this sort of thing. But my goodness, I mean, if you watch that show, I mean, it is just one of the most fascinating explorations of faith in the modern world that I can think of in a lot of different ways, and of the Catholic Church, and of, you know, just so many other cultural factors. So I just wanted to put that on the table. This is a scattershot podcast. We're going to do some deep dives into different documents and films and stuff like that, in addition to our usual, you know, kind of repartee here back and forth. So that's just a little preview, but just wanted to put that on the table for everybody who maybe is familiar with our work, Bobby, and knows that we are interested in those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I know that, you know, being here in Krakow for the last couple of months, I've been talking to some Polish intellectuals, some hoping to get in touch with many of the, you know, some Polish directors. I actually wrote to Krzysztof Zanussi. So
Yeah.
he's one of Martin Scorsese's friends, but he's quite an interesting director. He's like a part philosopher, physicist, and movie director. And so
Yeah.
all of his movies, I mean, they always are kind of posing the existential questions, and they never end like kind of, they're not like a Hallmark movie where you can kind of really, you know, just have like an optimistic, you know, really happy ending. They always end in a somewhat not depressing manner, but strange at least manner. And but you always walk away from the films wondering, okay, why did he choose this to film it this way? Why was this, you know, why was this in that scene? And so they're very meaningful films. So actually, I got a response from Zanussi. He says he told me to come see him sometime. So I'm hoping someday that we could get. I know he's quite elderly, but he's pretty active on social media, and I think he would love the chance to talk to Americans and other Europeans, and also to talk about the faith. He's a faithful Catholic, so but quite interesting one.
Yeah. Is he in Warsaw?
I think he is in Warsaw.
So we could go knock on his door, and then we can go knock on Pavel Pawlikowski's door.
Yeah.
And just kind of see if we can make friends with all of the Polish Catholic filmmakers.
That's right, man. I don't want to reduce it to Poland, but, you know, at least start here.
Let's talk for a second, Bobby, about like who our audience is, who are our fellow travelers. You know, I think an important thing that we want to point out is, you know, our appreciation for Europe, European culture, and the faith. And Europe is in no way some kind of, you know, blood and soil movement. You know, that's not what this is about at all. Nor are we, although we are amateurs in the literal sense of the word of political philosophy, and we have certain opinions about kind of what the best, I don't know, political form might be. I find mine changing from day to day, to be honest. But I would think we're not. We're not, strictly speaking, just interested. We're very interested in the future of Christian society, but not necessarily interested in prescribing the precise political form. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
Yeah. I want to make sure to avoid that, because it seems like a lot of the discussion, as interesting as it is right now, is definitely focused in on the Christian political form. But I think getting at something a little bit deeper than that, you know, the Germans like to distinguish between politics and culture, Kultur. And so it seems to me that we're focused on the latter, and trying to transform things, even politics, by focusing in on that. So, and in some ways, you look at not only like Germany, when Germany didn't have United State, you have people like Goethe doing this, even in a way Schiller. I mean, they turn to the arts as uniting the Germans. The same thing for Poland. When Poland was partitioned, but it was still a nation. But it turned to the arts, the young Poland movement, and then John Paul
Yeah.
II was even a part of that. So
Yeah.
I think that, taking that type of stance, that's what we're focused in. But like forming a culture of hope, but one that is very much grounded in hope as a theological virtue. So
Yeah.
ultimately grounded in the liturgy and partaking in the death and resurrection of Christ as being the very kind of way in which this culture will blossom.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Bobby, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
You know me too well, Andrew. What do you think?
I think that I think you and I both are prone to pessimism, but I think that we are both men of joy, and certainly men of hope. And I there are definitely times when I think you are optimistic and when I am optimistic, but I don't think that being an optimist is necessarily the best thing. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the older I get, pessimism just I don't know, just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Not in the sense though that like it goes against hope. I mean, we were talking earlier about George Grant, that
Hmm.
Canadian philosopher who's focused on technology and the modern postmodern age. And everybody, said after reading him that, man, you paint such a dark picture of the future. Do we have anything to be optimistic about? And they got really mad at him for not being optimistic, especially, that's a really bad thing for Americans.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was always accused of not being optimistic enough, and that encouraged my pessimism even more. Um, but I think we just got to be careful just to make sure that hope is different than optimism.
Yeah.
And we both like Scruton, so we
Yeah.
both have read an awful lot that we don't like where things are heading.
Hmm.
But yet still, this is a certain hope. So it's much deeper than anything that we can kind of like read in the times right now.
Yeah. Right. And even if we're pessimistic, which I mean, I generally am about the state of culture, but this is something that Pope Benedict talks about in Spe Salvi, that a
Yeah.
person of hope then is a person whose present then is defined by this ultimate goal.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what? I mean, yeah, it's really terrible that the culture is so bad. And also, well, let's find what's good and let's celebrate that and try and lift that up and try and make more of it. And because that is what's participating in this ultimate goal.
Mhm.
um, and it just occurred to me as you were talking that in the American context, we really, so you and I guess it's fair to say we are, I don't know, both kind of professional evangelists in a way. I mean, we worked for an organization that that's what it does. It's kind of media evangelism, and we were part of that team. We created videos and all that kind of thing. Something that keeps popping up though is this question of what is kind of like the posture of an evangelist in modern society today. And for a long time there were these figures who really believed that, especially kind of in the evangelical world, who really believed that what was the important thing was to have this winsomeness. And there's this guy James Woods who used to work at First Things, I think. I think we're both connected to him on Twitter, but he got in big trouble because he wrote this thing about how kind of the age of winsomeness is over. Like winsomeness just kind of didn't work, which is to say, like, as long as we're just kind of like positive and just kind of being a Christian is great, and like let's just kind of find the stuff we can agree on and not worry so much about the stuff we don't agree on and all that. It doesn't work. Now, not idealizing winsomeness doesn't mean that we should be jerks, I don't think we should. I don't think that's just a very good way to exist in society. But it also, I don't know, it's kind of liberating to me, Bobby. I don't know about you, but just to think like, I don't have to pretend to, I don't, for the sake of Christ, I don't have to pretend that like, oh, everything's cool, or anything like that. Like, I just don't think that's really what is asked of us, especially not if you look at the Gospels themselves. I mean, that's just not the way Christ moves around in the world at all.
I'll tell you this, at least in Poland, that's not going to win hearts. I mean,
No,
it's
right,
like the kind of American, like everything is awesome, from
right.
the Lego movie just doesn't really work. And also, yeah, I think like people just, people want honesty, like, and I don't think that faking it, people can tell when you're faking it, even when you're, kind of in a way, I hate to put it this way, but selling them the gospel.
Yeah,
It can tell whether or not the gospel has like truly like seeped in. And I think for the most part, most of the people who truly are the ones who suffer, who are you can tell they're truly suffering, but for the sake of ultimately love,
yeah,
it's suffering for the sake of love.
yeah.
Uh, that is truly what is going to inspire. So like Pope Benedict, whenever he ends the Spe Salvi encyclical this way, and from other writings that I've seen, he always refers to Mary as the font of hope, but then
Hmm.
puts her in the context of Mary's the one who stands under the cross. But
Yeah,
she has actually made the journey too in her assumption. So she is for us our hope that it's a certain hope because Mary, someone like us, but immaculately conceived, has made the journey, but yet she is under the cross. So I live not too far from a place called Kalvaria. I can't pronounce it correctly. Kalvaria Zebedowska,
hmm,
which is where John Paul II is. It's right by Wadowice, and it's where John Paul II discerned his vocation to the priesthood. And it's precisely the place where he told everyone in 1979 to pray for him after he dies. It was such a
mm,
it's on a hill, but you have the way of the cross. Okay, it's also called the way of Mary as well is with that. And so
hmm.
it's supposed to actually, it's up on a hill, but it's a big landscape. It's supposed to be like Jerusalem in a way. But what I was thinking is that um, it's literally, and every year you have one of the biggest passion plays in the world takes place there. But
Hmm.
in order to like, you know, you have to be someone who truly is close to the cross to be an effective, I think, evangelist. And I don't even like using that word really to be an
Hmm.
effective evangelist. I
Right,
feel like, you just sense it in the person. Like
right.
people sense like John Paul II, there was something that was not superficial, that they really through him encountered something more than him, namely
Right.
the Holy Spirit and Christ. Um, but anyways, that I'm going on too long, but
Yeah. No, you're not. I mean, just to put a bow on that. I mean, for my part, I would say, I'm not so interested in kind of propositional evangelism as much as kind of invitation to the mystery. And I just think, that also relates to our interest in Europe, and to pilgrimage, that uh, it actually turns out to be kind of hard to live the Christian life, if the way that that's supposed to work is, I mean, I felt this way as a Protestant before I was Catholic, that things are just kind of always supposed to make sense. The faith is just kind of always, you're supposed to kind of just be comfortable with that. And the thing is, like, I can't control that very well. I can a little bit, but something that is more powerful than that is the kind of cultural things, is the, the experience of just kind of like the walking, the praying, all the stuff that is still part of the fabric there of the faith in Europe and in other parts of the world too, but certainly is part of the rich inheritance that we're interested in exploring. So, on that note, let me throw it back to you by first, you can say whatever you like, of course, but where do we go from here? We hope that lots of people have tuned into this first podcast. We're going to keep pumping them out. We're going to get into a good routine here, and we're going to be producing good writing on our website and start planning some events. What's next?
Well, ultimately, I mean, I like a big goal is to gather a bunch of people in Krakow and to kind of have this gathering of minds, but also forming a network of people who are committed to this, committed to this experience of hope, but also looking at the arts and culture, like we were saying. So I really hope that this brings together, a unique group of people, and also that it's something that is going to truly look at Christianity as speaking, like Christ is speaking in a way to all of our experiences. So I want to kind of have this be like an experiential thing. So it's in a way, everything is going to be considered in a way. And you mentioned the propositional thing. I want as much as possible this to be something that's like a lived experience that does have an intelligible form to it, but it has to seep in. And we've talked very much. We mentioned film, but I want one of the big focuses to be to even consider something like film. It may not seem to fit, but I think that medium speaks to the human experience more than most other mediums do. So I'm hoping that once we get these articles going, we start articulating this vision, then we actually will start having gatherings in person in Europe and perhaps even in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll make t-shirts with your or my, maybe your face. I think there are in existence t-shirts with your face.
That's
on
a
them.
long
So
story.
maybe we can.
There are even socks, I guess.
There are even socks. There's a pillow. But who wouldn't want some Spe Salvi Institute merch? It's something to think about.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's start another publishing line, as if there's not enough of those.
I think there's market space for it, but we shall see. We shall see. All right. On that note, we're going to wrap up. This is only our first podcast, but please, if you're listening, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. If you're listening in audio form, if you're watching us by video, please do go ahead and subscribe so that you don't miss new stuff as it appears as well. Check out our website, which, Bobby, is what?
SpeSalviInstitute.com.
Yeah, SpeSalviInstitute.com. Follow both of us on Twitter and other social media if you have not done so already. And until next time, God bless.